just got to the offices here at Union, which we've been in this space for 5 years. Our lease is up and I could not be more excited to be moving offices. I can't believe we've been here 5 years. I can't believe we've been an agency for 14 years. That's been blowing my mind a little bit lately. But what also blew my mind was a couple weeks ago, I had a conversation with Christina Teves, and I can't believe it's been this long until we're now just releasing it. But Christina is the founder of Say Sorbet, which is a comms agency in Boston, and we have so much in common. Just her focus on working in the health space, her perspective on messaging for brands, and literally I could not have paid her to promote how critical using video right now is in the health space. And so Christina has an awesome background. I'll let her share about their agency stories. I'll let her share about writing for certain American Idol judges. I won't tell you who quite yet, but let's get into the interview. Here's Christina, and let's dive right into her background. To kind of dive into a little bit more of your background, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, obviously, with what you're doing today, but give us Christina in a nutshell, and in that nutshell are two nuts. But that kind of personal life and like your work history. Just like give us a good picture of you.
Okay, I love blending these two things. I grew up a theater kid, so I think a lot of my connection to people and communicating and where my professional life has taken me is somewhat rooted in that, right? I just love storytelling. I love being able to tell complex things in ways that people can understand and connect to on an emotional level. You know, I did theater as a really small kid, and then, you know, through high school and a little bit in college, moved to New York, did a little acting work. And so for me, it's just been part of my life. And so I love that. And I've done writing behind the scenes. And so it just fuels me in a different way. And professionally, I started my career as a publicist. And so it's such a different space for me than where I'm at today. And I was working on very heavy media relations activities where, you know, it was a very different time, a very different era, and exciting, but I kept feeling like I wanted something that was more strategic, more on the brand marketing side. And so I shifted to global agencies, and I sort of fell in love with brand marketing and, you know, brand positioning and messaging and being able to collaborate with all these external partners. And so I think I found my footing there, and I did that for a while. I left a really great role I had at an agency, and I went to freelance and fell in love with that. I was like, oh, I can do this. And so it's really interesting because I talk to people now, and I'll talk to people in their 40s and 50s, and they're like, I don't think I can do that. I'm like, well, yeah, I didn't think so either. And it's so interesting to hear how people feel about that. But then I went to another agency and loved it, and went to work for a startup. I call it my rejection era. That didn't really work out as planned. Trying to figure out, like, what do I do now? You know, I've sort of done all these things, and where's my place in the world, in the professional world, right?
Sure.
And one of my mentors gave me such great advice, and she said, "Why don't you just keep freelancing until you find your dream job?" And I was like, yeah, I could do that. I could do that. And so that's what I did. And then 2020 rolled around, and I thought, you know, I want to be able to bring people into the fold and work with, you know, my friends and work with these great people who I've made relationships with over the years. And so that's when I officially launched my company, Say Sorbet.
Yeah. And that's 5 years in. I mean, I just saw the statistic last week or 2 weeks ago that it's just shy of 50% of businesses never make it to 5 years. So consider yourself in the top 50% of entrepreneurs right off the bat.
I didn't know about that data, so that's amazing. Thank you. I'm going to go celebrate after this.
Right, exactly. I love the perspective of wanting to work with friends and the colleagues and the awesome people that you'd met along the way. I think the beginning of a lot of agencies or consultancies may look a little bit more of self-centered versus your perspective, where it's a bit more of like, I want my voice to finally be heard, or people keep killing my baby in the agency. I want to, you know, I want to be the thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of sound like you want to be a little bit more of like kind of the center spoke, the center of the wheel that brings together a ton of good people. Is that how it's been working the past 5 years?
Yeah, and I think I want you to put that language on my website for me because you
Yeah,
articulated
yeah, I'll
that
do it
really
right now.
write
You
it,
all set,
but I'll
you're
give
done.
you the login. No, that's exactly it. I think something that I've learned probably over the last, 10 years is the importance of relationships and fostering those relationships. And I don't know that I did a great job of that, earlier in my career, especially with, just being young and thinking about the race and promotions and all the things and just, focusing on what you really just described, like me and where am I going and what am I getting and all that stuff. And yeah, and one of my mentors, he's taught me that too. He's like, just don't have relationships with the purpose of getting something out of it. Like, yeah, make them genuine. And that is what I do. And that is what brings me happiness and joy.
Yeah. It makes me think of that phrase, by yourself you can go fast, but with others you can go far. It's some butchered version of that quote, but the meaning is still there. And I couldn't agree more. I think, when when I began Union as a video agency, kind of by default, I was wearing all of the hats, but also by a level of control freak, I was wearing all of the hats and eventually beginning to work with specialists in different categories and replacing myself in areas initially where I'm like, I don't like this. I don't want to do it anymore. But also things where like, whoa, that person's really good. And instead of feeling a competition with them, say, man, I wonder if we did this together and we made it even better for the end client, how much further we could go.
I love that. And it reminds me of something that I've said before to clients and some old website copy, but I said, the focus is on collaboration, not competition. And
Yeah.
so it's like, how can I best serve this client? How can I bring in the right talent? And also, what you just described or alluded to in terms of bringing people in to do the things that maybe don't bring you joy. I'm like,
Yeah.
I always tell clients that they're like, oh, I don't want to do this. I was like, so pay someone to do it. Like, and the things that you're really, really good at, right? Because that stuff's just going to drag you down. And then
Yeah.
it's, so it just weighs on you anyway. So I could not agree more.
Yeah. And now you've had like within, major agencies and different past experiences, a lot of different verticals that you've worked in. But I know Say Sorbet has a clear focus within health, within nonprofit, maybe some other categories that you would add on, any categories that I'm missing there. But tell me a little bit about why you chose that and how that's been going.
Yeah, I like to say I grew up as a generalist, so that's
Yes.
why I was able to.
That was a new client just calling from this show already. Can you believe it? You're
That is
welcome.
just
You're just
calling
welcome,
in.
Christina.
What a rookie move. I worked across consumer, healthcare, technology, everything basically that the agency would have as a client. And so it's great because there was always work and you had a little bit of job security, but at the same time, you were sort of stretched in a bunch of different, ways and thinking about, okay, I have to kind of pivot from here to here. And I love that for a really long time. I did. And then I think as my career evolved and I found my passion points and thinking about, uh, focusing on complex health issues, focusing on mental health and things like that. I was like, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here and see where it goes. And it's been amazing. But yeah, I think all of that generalist experience has given me such depth and a lot of knowledge. So applying those things to healthcare, which has different parameters and barriers, it's like it's fun. It's fun to figure out what that looks like.
Was that a slow aha moment or was it a quick one?
That's a really interesting question. It was a slow moment. I think year one and year two, I was very much taking on consumer work and not really focusing on it so much. But if something came through and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But then I felt like my heart's really over here in healthcare, right? And
Mm,
and again, just thinking about who's on the other end of that and thinking about
sure.
people that need, solutions. And so being part of that just felt very rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. I think our journey at Union has been very similar. This month is 14 years as a company and, video is applicable like in every industry, right? So when you start off very generalist, you're learning, we've done work for ESPN and the WWE, all the run the gamut.
Yes, I like
We've
it. I love that.
right we've done work for these different channels, but over the years slowly realizing who we feel really good doing work for, who feels good to wake up to talk with on a Monday, using the power that video has to impact an area that's not just, let's say, choke slams and grand slams. I've never
Yes.
used that before. That was wonderful. Write it down. Somebody write that
Yeah, that was fun.
down.
Gotta get a pen.
Thank you. Scramble for a pen. Um, it's just so much more rewarding. And I
Yeah.
think, and I'm guessing you found the same thing. When you stick within a category, you often find similar problems that those clients have that need to be addressed, and you become better and better at addressing those problems. What are some of the common things that you see that you help people solve for within the folks that you've been working with?
I think there's a couple things that stick in my brain right now. I think one is, across clients, whether it's a payer or a provider, or service of some sort, how do we better serve our customer, client, member, right? And so it's like, I feel like all of these clients at the core, they're there for a purpose, like a bigger purpose. Again, it just goes back to this idea it's rewarding and it's fulfilling. And so on the comm side of things, and especially with content, being able to explore that and being able to, figure out how do we tell these really complex stories in a way that's digestible. And so, and in connecting with these audiences. So that's one thing that sticks out. I think it's funny, every client wants to be innovative, right? And I'm sure this is like a buzzword for you too, right? It's like, we're innovative, we're innovative. And I had this conversation. It's like, I can't, I'm trying not to laugh, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I had a conversation last year with a client, and it was around an award submission, and amazing company, Fortune 500 company. And they asked me, they said, can you give us an opinion about why we didn't win this? And so I'm reading this award submission. I said, because you're not innovating.
Mm.
What? And so it's this like light bulb moment of this.
Sorry, what?
But innovation is such an overused word,
Yeah.
and it's kind of in my list of, do not say words, and
Yeah.
I get it. But I think innovation has to be challenged, because whether it's,
Yeah.
product innovation, process innovation, it's like you have to show the evolution. You have to show what has changed. And so, for me, it's like I serve as this resource to clients to say, okay, well, what does look feasible in terms of innovation? So figuring that out, because again, there is a demand for it, but not everyone can achieve it. It's this very vague thing that has lots of nuance. So there's that. I think the other part is probably in healthcare, specifically with a lot of what's happening in the world, especially with government funding, thinking about access, right? Like there's a lot of limitations and access to programs, to just things that I think are necessary for people to live better lives, for people to do their jobs, for programs to be funded. So I feel like right now that's sort of a thread that I'm seeing with all of my clients. How do we ensure that we keep things afloat and we continue to do what we're here to do? And so those are a couple things that are kind of sticking with me right now.
Yeah. The innovation thing definitely jumped off to me specifically because it's constant, right? That term, and it carries no weight without definition. And so it's better, I think, often when we have those types of conversations, it's like, why don't we just show that you're innovative instead of just say the buzzword that you're innovative? We often in our script writing will find moments where we kind of inject a bunch of those kind of buzzwords. And the term that I often say is that sometimes if it's worth mentioning, it may be worth describing. So instead of saying that something's like our innovative product, say something else about the product and then describe what makes it innovative instead. It's like either cut it out or go deeper in, like to decide.
No, that's such a great point. And I think, it's funny. What I love so much about video in healthcare, especially because again, healthcare has so many barriers, or I would say restrictions, right? There's just
Sure.
so many things that, from my experience, I mean, I think about the types of video content I would create for consumer clients. And I mean, we would get some really, I don't want to say bizarre, very, sometimes a little absurd types of requests and things that we did. And let's push boundaries, and let's maybe be really weird, or be really direct, like whatever it was. It was like, wow, this is really interesting and intriguing, and you're kind of figuring that out. But healthcare's not like that. You can't just, it doesn't play by the same rules. So I think, when you have video that can tell a really complex story, and sometimes it's not even using words, it's just about creating emotion, especially now with, again, things that are happening in society, things around DEI. You can visually share a point of view, you can visually share a connection point without saying a word. And I find that really, really interesting. And I'm thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point, because the reality from where I sit on on the side of the table is that 3 years ago, we every email I got was, we need a DE and I video. And now it's not a conversation at all. And it's just like, I really do believe that there's like a pendulum swing of constant kind of overcorrection to kind of find that sweet spot. And I think you've described it a little bit, where, and again, it's the same analogy as with the term innovation. Instead of just saying it, show it. Instead of like saying you are, be it. And we can take some of these things that are really positive and use it to just tout ourselves, and it is self-defeating to the intention of the thinking anyway, and it's just icky, honestly,
Yeah,
sometimes.
no, I do
That's
agree.
the technical term. It's
Yeah,
icky.
I use it, and I think it's a great way to describe it, but it's hard, especially when you're tasked with bringing that content to life, right?
Yeah,
Because we all have our own belief systems, and then if
sure.
you're getting something, and you're like, oh, it's client service, right? But at the same time, it's like it's also, I think, on us to be able to give a POV and to help guide them along the way. And yeah, I just it's an interesting place to be right now as a content creator, especially with video.
Sure. And I think I appreciate something I think I'm hearing from your perspective too, is that probably not as many of the requests that we got probably came from a self-serving place as I, in my own filter, perceived, because they were coming in mass, versus the people who are like, I don't really know a better way to say this, but this is the heart of who we actually are.
Oh, I like that.
Hey, I'm open to change every step of the way of this conversation.
Same. No, same. I no, I appreciate the point of view. It's no, it's well said.
We were chatting last week or 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting, and this is a phrase that we hear very frequently too, is like, our competitors are like, they're out there. And this term of just like kind
Out
of,
there. What are they doing?
right? Like, I know
They're
what you
doing out
mean, but
there.
also tell me more about what you mean. And they kind of like, they're out there, like, why not us? And you said you just encountered a lot of that, and not to fill in the answer, but you talked so much about this kind of like, well, let's try it,
Yeah.
related to how to solve that. But bring me back to some of those like early conversations of like, the competitors are out there. How can we be out there? How do you often answer
Yeah, they're out there, and I feel like yeah, I have this one client that, and there's my clients. I honestly, I work with the most amazing clients, like smart, good people, and
Yeah,
I could be more grateful. And but there's always these moments where you hear things, and it's like, well, they're doing this, right? Or
yeah,
I'm like, well, of course, they've probably been planning that for a year. Like it's a big
yeah.
undertaking, and we knew about it's fine. There's always questions, but I think, for me, the big thing is there are some brands that are willing to take risks and there are
Mm,
others who aren't. And there's a fear behind tackling something that might feel risky, right? And that's human and that's normal. And I don't couldn't not understand where they're coming from because I get it, right? That's just a normal human reaction. But I think the thing is that people are looking at a really large situation, right? They're looking at something really, really big and broad. And what I would say, and what I have said to clients is, why don't we just take a small bite of that, right? Like, why don't we look at a very specific audience? Let's test and learn. Like, let's take a really, really small bite. And I think it's like, I don't know. I don't know why this is not in my brain, but it's like, if you've ever seen the Trader Joe's like mini sheet cakes, they're like this big,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I
Like you
love
don't
Trader Joe's.
cake. It's like just have a Trader Joe's mini sheet cake, right? And like tiny little, still wonderful. I consider it single serve. I don't know how others feel about it.
Ah,
If you know, you know. If you know, you know.
depends on the day. Depends on the day.
It's usually a full sheet cake day, if it's in my house. But no, it's essentially like test and learn, right? And so you can go back and instead of overthinking, because I think I've heard the same ideas from clients year after year. And it's like this rumination process that takes over. And so let's test it, let's learn from it, let's get some data, let's get some insights. And then when leadership comes back and says, why haven't we done this? It's like, oh no, we did. And this is what we learned. And now next year we're gonna do XYZ and we're gonna elevate what we did. You just need to, it's that old saying, like dip your toe into the water. I'm a
Sure.
cold plunge kind of girl. So like I'm all in. I get it. Like you can't do that with clients. And so I respect it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like I think the test and learn idea gives people a sense of calm. And it's
Yeah,
like, I could totally do that. And so I feel like that's just a nice way to sort of wrap it all up for someone to take the next step.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a the suggestion to go that route is also a major trust builder, because I think whether you're in, the video world or you're doing PR stuff, what's the flashiest side of PR? From my perspective, it's like the big stunt, or right, that gets pulled off, and so I feel like that's um, the glory gold standard of why don't we do that and go all in. But maybe several $100,000 just spent on a thesis isn't the best way to go, or a guess isn't the best way to go, but to begin to test and learn with low stakes. It's not flashy, but it's the better way to do it.
It is. It's like a slow burn, and when you
Mm.
were talking about, it like brought me back, way back to my professional archives. I was like,
Very triggered, maybe, right?
I got a little choked up. I actually had a visceral reaction to that because I think about these like multi-million dollar events, like in Times Square. It's like,
Yeah.
and this is again like consumer. It's like, how do we attract, consumer audiences? So a client would say, how do we attract consumers? Let's go to Times Square. And it's like, well, is that our audience? It's like, the tourists that are visiting New York. And so
Sure.
lived in New York for a while back in the day. I mean, I could not tell you the times I visited Times Square willingly. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no reason, right? You've seen it once, you're good. So it's a little more challenging within healthcare. And so I think especially within audiences. So who are we trying to reach? And so, if it's a member or a patient, I mean, I don't know. I think there's so many great ways to approach video, especially with the subject matter experts and thinking about something that's really authentic. I don't know, just again, it's that connection point, like how do we create that? And so, it is so different though.
Yeah. Can you give me some examples, maybe? And they don't have to be specific, but they could be, a smushing together of several memories, related to those times when, whether someone wanted to do something or just wanted to achieve a goal, and video ended up being the suggestion. Because I do think that there's a lot of times that a stakeholder brings to the table either a goal or, hey, we should do a video for that, right? And so when you've been a part of that conversation, what has kind of some of the steps walking out to find the right story or develop the right idea typically looked like for you?
One example is coming to mind. A few years ago, I had a client who wanted to reach field employees.
Mm,
So they had a corporate office, but the majority of the company were field employees. So we're talking about like 50,000 plus people.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so, working in traditional comms and thinking about, emails and newsletters and, all those things, we sort of took the step back and said, are we connecting with these colleagues, or do they understand what's going on, at the corporate office? Do they feel like they're part of this team? Because it can be isolating, when you're not part of the day-to-day corporate. And then also as a field employee, there's so many different offices or locations. One thing that we did, we talked a lot about, and I was so excited about this. We had a great C-suite leader, and she's just very personable and very, very human. I can't really describe her in another way. And why don't we do a video series with you? And she's like, what do you mean? And I remember having this conversation, and I said, well, why don't you just sit down and have coffee with people and, like just talk? Like, you're great at doing that. You're great at having these one-on-one conversations and breaking down walls and just being a person, right? Because I think at the end of the day, like that's the best communicating. You're not reiterating jargon or like company speak, and you're showing the company culture through that as well. And so I eventually got her on board and we storyboarded it. And it was so much fun. I mean, it was so much fun to take this brand that had never done anything like that before, had so much not so much hesitancy, but a little bit, again, a little bit of fear. And it was meant to be internal, but years later, I mean, it's on YouTube. You can access it, and it's really fun. And she's so good at it. And I
Yeah.
think, again, she makes people really comfortable. I mean, she's a little talk show host in her own right. But it's nice because it's like, again, especially with internal comms, you can do so much writing. And I feel like writing is great and it's good to have it as a reference point. But how are you really talking to your colleagues and your team? And how are you
Mm.
motivating them? And how are you pulling back the curtain and really making sure that they understand what the day to day looks like? And are we all united and aligned on the same goals? So I loved that project. It was so gratifying. It was really, really fun.
It's such a good solution. And I'm curious, and you might not know for them, but obviously you spoke to kind of like the fear of going forward and actually doing that. What do you think they were scared of? I mean, was it misplaced, misspent budget? I mean, maybe with 50,000 employees, maybe not so much. Was it like not coming across the right way? Like what was the worry, I guess?
I think the worry is it was something they had never done before. And
Mm,
it was really, I think it's a very normal scenario where we haven't done this. And should we do it? And we have nothing to compare it against, so unique. And, I think that was probably a big hurdle and also resourcing. So thinking about not, I don't know if it was really budget, but maybe resources and maybe that hits budget, of course, in some way, but thinking about someone who's at a very senior level and saying, hey, this is what the commitment looks like. And this is the prep, you're thinking about the script, you're thinking about who's the next guest and, having the whole production team and having everyone on site. So there's, a lot of layers to all of that behind the scenes. And I'm sure you've felt this so many times, but I think people grossly underestimate what a production looks like. They're like, "Oh, I'm just going to show up and we're going to be here for 2 hours." I'm like, 2 hours? Like,
right, times five.
yeah, exactly. And so it's like, no, that's why we ordered breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. And
Right.
so yeah, that always cracks me up. I think that's funny. But yeah, I think it was more of that. And I think, you know, maybe from a leadership perspective, what will other leadership do? Because they weren't doing anything like that. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of a first of its kind, which was super exciting to be part of.
Yeah. Was there a moment in that process that you remember the client going from fear and hesitation to like, I think this might work?
Yes, that's so funny that you said that because I actually can answer that so quickly. She picked up her cup of coffee and she just starts talking about what's in her coffee and she's like so excited and she forgot everyone was there. She forgot it and
Wow.
she was talking to the guests and they sort of laughed
Yeah.
because I think they were surprised how comfortable and they were like, "Oh, are we on we're on a talk show." It was so fun and she just let her guard down and I'm like, that's what
Mm.
people need to see from leadership.
Yeah.
And I get it. You have to have your professional persona, but at the end of the day, people need to understand that you are a person. They need to understand that you care about them. They want to hear from you. They want to communicate with you. And so, I don't know, she was just like talking about how she had, her coffee this morning and I was like, "What is she doing?" She's just like going off script. I was like, "I love this for her." So, it was a very cool moment and I was, watching her, I was standing next to the main camera and he kind of just like laughed too. He's like, "Look at her." I was like, "I know." It's a problem.
Yeah. I love that. It's like, whoa, she's so human all of a sudden.
She was, and she was anyways, but I think the
Yeah.
joy was I got to show that, well, we all got to show that to
Yeah.
other people, and so that was super gratifying.
That's really special. We had a similar conversation literally yesterday. We were reviewing a round of scripts for a campaign that we're doing, and some of the things that we were kind of adjusting on our end. I'll admit it, they're not perfect the first draft when we do
No,
it.
they're never. No, they're never.
Crazy. And we were reviewing, and we started this interesting dialogue between this sounds more professional to say, more like accurate to how the industry would say it. And this sounds simpler. We almost said like,
First, because yes, I know where you're going. Yes.
right? And we began to just have this dialogue about it. And my perspective is always I always want our content to have something unexpected within it to grab and be memorable. And I think especially, and this was in the med device space, if you're really showing humanity and conversational tone in a product video, man, you really differentiate from, and it's very low hanging fruit to be able to differentiate using your humanity than trying to just seem so technical. Where it's gotten to feels like a really big win.
I could not agree more. I mean, it's like, and you know this more than anybody, probably way more than me, but when you get that script, and I'm laughing because yes, the first draft is always like, it's
Right.
it's kind of icky. It's like, oh, I don't know about
Do I
that.
even know how to write?
Right. Yes. Am I doing this for a living? Someone's paying me for this. So no, and I mean that's a great part about iterations and being able to sit with material. And so that's something I practice all the time with any kind of content development, any kind of writing. But to what you're saying, it's so important to read it out loud. And so, I actually did that with a client one time. We were looking at a script and I was like, so I just want to spend
Yeah.
15 minutes. Let's read this out loud. And they were like, okay. And why?
Hard.
And so we started reading it out loud and I said, so how are you feeling? And she goes, wow, that sounds horrible. And she's like, it sounds robotic. And I
Yeah.
go, yeah. I said, so the next version, let's think about, what you or I would do in this scenario. And we're different people, different, circumstances, but let's meet in the middle and find common ground. And then let's, edit that. And that's what we did. But, she said to me, she's like, oh, it was so fun doing that because I learned, moving forward, it's like, make it about the everyday, right? Like, create that everyday connection because it just goes over people's head otherwise. And and it sounds crazy.
And it is funny because when the content is meant to be heard, not read, it's amazing how often revisions and review comes from just reading it in your head and writing it like you would website copy or a PR release or something like that, which all could have more, I think, humanity in it from my perspective. But when you do read it out loud, suddenly like the grammar and the punctuation, and not as much the grammar, but the punctuation and the flow matters more. And so I end up doing more underlining of words that I want you to hit in a certain way than I do of worrying, wow, that's a run-on sentence. Because when you say it, this is how we still talk.
Yes. I have to tell you something really quickly because this is another archive story. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
dating myself with all these archive stories, but I'm just gonna let me.
They're recent archive.
Yeah.
It's
No, no, no. I mean, you're very kind. They're not recent. This is at one of my former agencies, and I got to work with a former host from American Idol, and this is when
okay.
American Idol was really big, and this host used to say "dog" all the time, right? And so I had to write a script. I had to write I don't know if I'm legally allowed to say names of people that I don't necessarily
Oh,
work with.
Simon. No.
No, not right. So I was in charge of writing the script for their radio media tour.
Yeah.
And I remember writing it and I watched the show at the time. It was really big at this point. And I wrote dog, like, because I knew exactly what to say. And I went to the EVP, the executive VP in my office, who was the most refined woman I will ever meet in my life. I mean, she was going like the symphony like once a week and she was just like super buttoned up and yeah, just super polished. And she's reading it and she's just looking at it and she's like, I don't understand. And I go, dog, do we want to say that? Why would we say that? And I said, no, we want to say that. I said, that's
Yeah.
exactly what he would say.
Right.
And
He might say it anyway.
yeah, but it was so interesting. It was also this moment for me to advocate for myself, which was really interesting because this is
Yeah.
someone that I mean, it was very early in my career,
Sure.
but I knew the answer and I knew the right answer. And so we left the script as it was and it was great. And the spokesperson had no feedback to it. And so they're like, yeah, this is good. So, but it's just funny. It's like, yeah, other people's reactions to things who don't work on video content or scripts or anything like that. I mean, it's different. You have to make sure you have all the voices weighing in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, clearly. I think even the ability to obviously a known phrase that
Yeah.
he said at the time, but also I'm sure just kind of studying the way his speech flowed, because the last thing you want is it to feel like a scripted, plug, as opposed to something very natural that people aren't tripping over, but instead are actually listening to what's being said. I completely agree. It makes me think too, one of the things that early in our conversation last week, 2 weeks ago, the idea, we talked a lot about how we both experienced this ability to bring outside perspective into an organization. I mean, you brought an outside perspective to a woman who clearly wasn't watching American Idol, but was busy studying the cellos. But when you're a total outsider, you get to bring it into an organization. And sometimes that even makes you an advocate for ideas that already exist, a champion for ideas that already exist. But tell me a little bit more about what your experience is when it comes to being being an outside person in an inside room and how that can make a difference for an organization?
Well, I love that question. Yeah, I think for me, it's a really great honor to have that role, right? And to be able to go into
Wow.
an organization and to say, trust me, right? You trust me
Yeah.
to give this perspective. I think what's really interesting, and you sort of hit on this, is, I have found with so many clients is that, I will come in and reiterate or revive or remind them about something that maybe they thought of a while back. But it's different coming from me, right? So if senior leadership hears it coming from an outside consultant, I have found that they do sometimes listen a little bit more. And I've said this to my clients. I said, don't be offended. I said, I'm not smarter than you. I said, I'm not wiser. I'm not, any of those things. It's just the fact I'm presenting it in a different way. And I think it was what Robert Kaminsky, who was saying on your show, is like, it's a different lens, right? It's not different information. It's just a different lens. And that's what I provide. And so that resonated with me when I heard him say that. I was like, yeah, it's true. And the best consultants or the best outside thinkers are the people who are allies. And, I want to make sure that I'm supporting my clients. I think, we were saying this earlier, this kind of mentality of, I want this for me and I want the glory and all that stuff. And it's like, I have the complete opposite goal when I work with my clients. I want to make them shine. I'm not here for that credit. I don't need that. What I love is them coming back and saying, we got this plan approved and we're going to have this activation because, we talked about it, we strategized and you supported us, or you saw something and you brought it to the table. And so I think that is like such an incredible feeling and an incredible gift. And so when I see consultants who come in and they're like, well, I'm going to change the world for everybody and I'm going to do, I'm just like, oh my God, here we go. And so, and they do exist. And I've had to work with them too, and they throw a lot of words and a lot of things. And I'm like, where's the execution? But there's that. And, I don't know. I heard this in a workshop a few weeks ago. This facilitator who is really incredible, he said, every organization needs a truth teller. And I think a lot of people internally are probably really scared to be the truth teller. So I'm the truth teller a lot of times. I'm like, I'm here to deliver that message for you. Let me take that burden off of you and let me go find out what's going on, right? Let me ask those questions. And so yeah, I mean, every organization needs outside thinkers. It's like you need an editor, you need a fact checker. It's like that's the work is better because of it. It's not about conflicting ideologies. It's about like, how do we just make this great? And how do we make it work? And how do we take things that are maybe in call it the ideas graveyard or reframe the ideas playground, and how do we look back and say, like, we have all these really cool ideas, but they never went anywhere. So do we want to go back and, figure out, does something here fit? So yeah, it's really fun to play that role. I don't know. I love it.
Yeah. And it's for that internal person, I think of the kind of quote where it says, a prophet is never accepted in their hometown, right? Whereas like, well, that's Matt from marketing. Like he's got ideas, but not the big ones. The big ones come from outside.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and it feels like you come in and sometimes the superpower is just to add gas in the tank of a car that's already been built, and actually see it happen.
Boy, that's the best part. I mean, that's the best part. And I think, in addition to truth teller, it's like, you are that advocate. And I don't know, I think sometimes what's really helpful is just validating, right? I find that with people in general, validating ideas or situations or circumstances, whatever it might be, just being a voice of validation and saying, like, I hear you, or I see that too, or I'm experiencing that. Like those things are really, really helpful. And I feel like those sometimes it's like not the role that you don't necessarily have to give the strategic advice. You just have to meet people where they are. And sometimes that's all they need in that moment. So yeah, it's not always about, let me push a 5-year plan on you. And so here's what we're going to do in, 2030. It's like, no, like today, this is what they need. And so give them that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. So was the story you had shared before about the woman in C-suite who's going and, doing these kind of interviews, was that a kind of idea graveyard turned to playground? Was that something that you actually kind of had a shooting star of like, oh, I think I see something here that could be solved? How did that play out?
That was the latter. I
Yeah.
was like, let's do a video series. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. It felt right. And I think there's some people, I know there are actually a lot of people who are, I don't know, they're naturally good at connecting with other people and speaking in, again, like non-corporate jargon and creating trust. And so I felt like that was the right move. And it was. I mean, it's been, continuing for years now. And so it's nice to see that it's evolved and, it's been successful.
When you're tasked maybe with coming up with something new, obviously there's a secret sauce in your just DNA that makes it, you see those shooting stars and say, oh, there's one of those ideas. But when it comes to developing, when you know you have to tell a story about something, and you do have a mission for what you want to communicate, how do you go about finding those stories in an organization or developing one kind of from a blank page? What does the beginning of your process look like?
I would say the beginning for me always starts with the people at the organization.
Yeah.
So I'm very blessed. I work with some incredible subject matter experts. So my SMEs and across all my clients, I have these people who most of them have lived experience. So whatever they are working on, it's almost like they can practice what they preach, and it's so invigorating. I mean, you hear these stories or they're supporting these programs, I should say, and they understand the purpose and the why behind it in a very different way. And I feel like that's such an untapped audience. For me, healthcare, it's a little more complex because I don't always have access to patients or members. Sometimes I do, and that's great. But I work so closely with the SMEs because they're able to shine a light on, again, what they're seeing or, again, have experienced. And then I can start to unravel the ball of yarn when it comes to storytelling and go to them and say, hey, can we collaborate? And I want to bounce some ideas off of you. And funny, last year I had a call with a client and they said, can you draft some messaging for a new, a new piece of business? And I said, sure. And they introduced me to this woman. She was wonderful. And they said, she'll give you guidance. And so we started having this very, and I didn't know her. We started having this very, buttoned up call, oh, thank you so much. And oh, wonderful. And, all the things. And then I had this moment. I'm like, what are we doing? Right. And so I said, can I ask you a question? I go, would you be open to me interviewing you? Because what I was tasked to write, she lived. She had this lived experience. And in my head, I said, if I can hear from her firsthand what this is like, this messaging is going to take new form. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? Like, how do you talk like a human? And how do you put words together that people will understand and it resonates? And so she said, oh, okay. She was like really taken aback by it. And so I interviewed her and I said, if you have boundaries, let me know. We don't have to talk about certain things. And she was an open book and she was incredible. I mean, it was one of the best conversations I had last year. I will remember that conversation. And so after I delivered the messaging and one of my clients, they said, wow, this is really great. What great intel. Where did you get this from? I was like, well, I talked to her. It's like she's right there. She's right there. And so like, you have to tap into those people at the organization or they can say, well, I know someone. If I don't have that knowledge, I know someone who does. So if you're not talking to the people who work there, it's a big mistake. It's big, huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Just the human to human connection that you learn so much, whether it's within an organization or just 2 days ago, actually, we had an episode recorded that's not released yet with Chris Huang, who was within top first 10 employees at Pond 5. And a really fascinating conversation about how he did very similar things, but just with their customers, and was constantly just having just immersed himself in their language. And I mean, the ability to recount anything, any information, but using the vehicle of story is just the natural methodology of humans. And so, that's like, to me, it's like when you talk about, yeah, I'll always remember that interview. I'll always remember her story. That's what every PR, marketing, that's the only thing they want to do is like, oh, I'll always remember that thing. Once you've kind of found that, right, and had those conversations, unveiled that story, put it together, let's get a little tactical together and talk about like the vehicles that they can go down in terms of channels, in terms of even, choosing maybe between, oh, let's do an interview in this form and fashion. And I guess by that, I mean, let's do something really raw with an iPhone and it's, almost feels UGC versus man, this feels like something we should put to a commercial and could push in that method. Talk about some of that decision making and the conversations you're a part of when it comes down to how are we going to actually approach sharing this story?
I think it all depends. I mean, well, one of the first things is, who are we trying to reach? And
Yeah,
so
that's great.
that's the first question. And so I think for me, a lot of times, we're trying to reach again members or patients, and so what does that look like? I for me, what I always loved about the agency world was this cross collaboration with different partners, and so having these really great ideation sessions where we'd all literally sit at a table together. I mean, this I do miss that. Those types of interactions that you don't have as a remote worker, which I fully support. Uh, those things do energize you, and so I think it's really working together to put a strategy in motion that of course defines the audience. I always say, how do we want the audience to feel? And so I kind of start there and then work my way down from there and say, okay, where are they? How do we reach them? And so there's a lot of questions. My process is much more, it is, you said it. I mean, it's tactical. It's very much an intake type of process. A lot of questions just to understand where do we need to be? Where do we need to show up? When it comes down to social, like, are they here? Or are they somewhere else? And it's so funny because I feel like even now, when it comes to media, years ago there was this emphasis on national media publications, and now it's local. Everyone's vying for local media. They're like, no, local's great because you're actually reaching that customer or that patient or whomever it is. So those are a couple things that I think about. But I think at the end of the day, it's having the upfront work really show the why behind it, show how we're going to produce outcomes. Again, really focusing on that audience and making sure that we're showing up where they are. And again, how do we want them to feel? And so that program will really be able to support all of those goals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's excellent. I think, sometimes people start with the channel just because they, were reading Ad Age a couple weeks ago and were like, "Oh, wow, TikTok's really blowing up. Like we should be there." And again, it becomes a little bit more about like the we versus the who you're serving and where they are naturally to place that communication.
Yes. And then our competitors are out there. They're on.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. That absolutely brings us full circle. It's like they're out there. Why aren't we?
Out there. They're among us. It's great though, and it's hard. And I think it kind of goes back to have when they want to be somewhere really specific where they haven't been before. That's where I think the test and learn is really helpful. It's like I've had clients who have said, exactly that. We want to be on this channel, and I'm like, well, then let's try it out. Let's focus on that for a few months. And I think they also start to see the amount of dedication and commitment it takes, to be able to get engagement, to be able to get data. And so they're, oh wow, this is a little bit of a slog. Yes, it is. It is a slog. So yeah, it's not there's no like quick win. And especially with a brand video, brand content, it's much different than, an influencer piece of content or even a SME piece of content. So yeah, it's that education.
Yeah, yeah, different uses, different like intended ways to view the return on the investment,
Yes.
and if you're aligned on it up front, then you know what a win looks like afterwards. And that's one of the most critical things that I've always found is that, are we just pushing for awareness? We're not asking anybody to do anything except for hear us out and feel a certain way. And if we can focus on those things, versus some more bottom of funnel content where we're, looking to say, hey, consider being a member or, consider checking this out or try our low ticket offer. All of those things, you have to be aligned on the goals. So tell me, for Say Sorbet or even for yourself just individually, what are you excited about coming up? What are you working on? Take us into the present day. No more archive. Take us into the present
No, I can't do any more archive today. Like, it's way too much. I don't even know if it's nostalgia at this point.
day.
No, I think current day, I'm really excited about, really bringing content to the forefront of communication strategies for clients. I feel like
Sure.
I had a lot of really fun conversations where kind of piqued interest across different leadership and them saying, "Oh wow, that sounds really really novel. We haven't done this before," or "Hey, this could create an efficiency." And so I'm really thinking about how to package things up for clients in different ways. I have a client who told me something a few weeks ago. It was great advice. He's like, you have an idea, don't leave it on the shelf. I was like, oh, I have lots of ideas, right? And so it's so great. So there's that. And, and that's broad and it's wonderful. And I'll be working on that for the next few months, figuring out what does that look like. But I think from a creative perspective, I have a biweekly LinkedIn workshop. So I have a free workshop. It's called Study Hall. It's biweekly. It's free. You can pop in and brainstorm with other people and set some time aside to draft LinkedIn content and then, talk among the group and share ideas, and kind of goes back to validation. A lot of people are afraid to share ideas and don't know if it's going to stick. And so it's just a great place to get creative and to meet new people. It's a really wonderful community.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that group before. It's a pretty wide range of people
Yeah.
involved, right? There's not very strict criteria.
No, it's open to anyone that wants to join. And it's
Yeah, that's awesome.
so cool who shows up. Sometimes I'm like, oh, hi, I've never met you before. I had someone from Switzerland join a few weeks ago and it was wonderful. It's a great time. It's very, it's a great creative space.
Yeah, that's awesome. In the not free version of connecting with you would be working with you. What does your kind of like ideal client who really gets a lot of benefit from partnering with Say Sorbet look like? And what, like, are you taking on new clients right now at all?
That's really kind of you to ask me that. Am I taking clients right now? I mean, I could in theory, sure.
Sure.
I'm always open to networking and to building relationships. So that's a given. No, for me, I mean, I'm someone who is available for ongoing communication strategy. I specialize in thought leadership and executive platforms and any type of content development across video, script writing, bylines. I'm a ghostwriter for some of the greatest ones out there. So it's such a great journey. It's very exciting and rewarding. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. Not both nutshells because I one nutshell.
Right, exactly. The other nutshell will remain in New York
Remain
as
in
an
New York.
actress. Is there anything that we would find you in as an actress?
There may be an old Sopranos episode that I have put on pause many times and only sent to very, very few people. I didn't have any lines. I was just eating behind Carmela. But I mean, it's one of my favorite shows. I actually didn't get to see it here because I didn't have cable because I was living in New York and what it
The
was.
life of an actress.
As an actress, yeah. So no, I mean everything's good. Like I said, it was foundationally great experience for today. But yeah, I can't believe you asked me that, and I can't believe I said it, far and wide. But here we are.
If anyone finds a screenshot and sends it to you, do they win something or do they lose something? What do they get from you?
I'm not going to acknowledge the screenshot. I'll just leave them on red.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Christina, I so appreciate you coming on. This was a great conversation. Anyone who's watching can now stop and rewind to the beginning to go back through all the golden nuggets again. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. This has been so fun.